pushed north into the Blackfeet winter to die. A Lakota chief rode south and carried her back. They gave me a horse with a bad foreleg and 3 days of dried meat, and told me to ride until the Blackfeet country swallowed me. That was the sentence. No blood, no fire, just the north wind and the understanding that a man who rides into Blackfeet territory in the moon of falling leaves does not ride back out. The elders knew it. The young warriors standing at the edge of camp knew it. I knew it. My brother Red Crow had made the motion with his hand, a slow, flat sweep, like clearing dust from a stone, and the council had agreed without argument. Not quickly, I'll say that. They sat with it. They passed the pipe 3 times and let the silence do its work, and then one by one they had looked at the ground or at the fire or at the sky, and not one of them had looked at me and said, "No, this is wrong." 22 winters I had led men. 22 winters I had held the line between what the people needed and what they could bear. I had fed them through 2 hard droughts by moving us when other bands stood still and starved. I had negotiated with the Crow when everyone said it was not possible and brought us 6 winters of peace along the eastern range. I had sat in council with the white soldiers twice, and held the line on the treaty boundaries, while men I respected gave ground just to make the soldiers comfortable. And then one season, one decision about the new treaty, one choice to push back against a boundary change that would have taken our best winter grazing, and Red Crow had called it defiance. Called me a man who thought he knew better than the whole council. Maybe he was right about that last part, but defiance, no. I was trying to hold what was ours. Didn't matter, he swept his hand. The council agreed, the exile stood. I did not argue. A man who argues his exile sounds afraid of it. I was afraid of it, I will admit that now, but I was afraid of it the way a man is afraid of a long trail in bad weather, not paralyzed by it, just aware of the distance and the cold. I took the horse. I took the meat. I rolled my blanket and tied it behind the saddle, and I rode north without looking back at the camp. Looking back would have been worse than the cold. There were things I had wanted to say. I want to be clear about that. There was a version of me that stood in front of that council and said, "You are making a mistake, not about my worth, I won't argue my worth, but about what the treaty boundary means and what it will mean in 5 years when the soldiers push further and we have already given up the first line. You are sweeping out the man who is inconvenient to you and calling it justice, and it isn't justice. It's just Red Crow being afraid." There was that version of me that stood up and made that case. But I looked at their faces. The elders who had already agreed in their hearts before the pipe finished its circuit. The young men who were Red Crow's men now, who had come up under his leadership rather than mine, who had no loyalty to me to set against the loyalty to him. And I understood that the argument was already over. The council does not call a man before them to hear him argue. The council calls a man before them when the decision is already made, and the form of the thing requires his presence. So I said nothing. I took what they gave me and I went. That silence cost me something. It costs a man something to stand before his own people and have a thing done to him and say nothing. Not because silence is surrender, I don't believe that. But because the words were there and the words were right, and swallowing them had a particular weight, like swallowing stone. I carried that weight north, along with everything else. The horse's name was nothing I'd given it. It was a gray animal, past its good years, with a Roman nose and an eye that had gone cloudy at the edge, and the hitch in its right foreleg was there from the first mile. I could feel it through my knees, a small hesitation, a half-catch, like the joint was remembering that it was sore before it committed to the full weight of a step. By the second morning it was worse. By the third, I was walking it more than riding it. Walking beside a lame horse on the northern plain, in the moon of falling leaves. There is a kind of poetry to it that I was not in the mood to appreciate. The land up there north of our range is not land that welcomes the eye. I had been there before hunting, twice on scouting trips, once as a young man following a war party I had no business following, and it had always had this quality of being slightly hostile to presence. Not dramatic about it, Not the mountains, which make you feel small and acknowledged at once. Just flat and wide and the color of old bone, and the sky above it is the same sky we have always had except that up there it seems heavier, like it has settled closer to the ground, like it knows what it's looking at and doesn't think much of it. The grass had gone brown and dry, the kind of dry that crackles when you walk through it. Every step raised a small sound. I found myself slowing down just to stop making noise, which made no sense. There was no one to hear me, but the silence out there was of a particular quality that made intrusion feel wrong, as if the land had been empty long enough that it had gotten used to it. I made small fires at night, not big enough to cook on, not big enough to cast light more than 10 feet, just enough to have something to tend. A man with something to tend has a reason for the next hour. I am old enough now to know that the next hour is most of what keeps a person alive, and I was young enough then that I hadn't quite named it yet. I just knew that the fire helped and that I built it every night regardless. On the fourth day I found a creek still running, just barely, under a shelf of ice that had formed along the bank. I used the butt of my knife to break a hole in it and got down on my hands and knees and drank. The water was very cold and very clean, the kind of clean that comes from a long way underground, and it tasted of stone and distance. I let the gray horse drink. It was a long time at the water and I didn't rush it. Whatever time I was saving by rushing, I didn't need. There was a stand of brush along the bank, willow, and some dried-out alder, enough to block the wind for a night, and I pulled the horse in there and sat with my back against the cut bank. The bank had a small overhang, just enough so the snow that had started falling that afternoon didn't come directly down on me. I ate the last of the dried meat, and stared at the flat darkness, and thought about the men I had ridden with over 22 winters. Not Red Crow. I had already finished thinking about Red Crow. I had spent the first day and a half of the ride turning that over, looking at it from every angle, and there was nothing more to find in it. He had made a choice. I had made a choice. The council agreed with his. The thing was done. Turning it over one more time would not change its shape. I thought about 2 runs, who had been at my right hand for 11 winters, who had the kind of loyalty that does not require discussion, because it has been established through action over so many years that discussion would only cheapen it. 2 runs, who was not given to sentiment or to speech, and who had looked at me when they announced the exile with an expression I had not seen on his face before, not grief, not quite. More like a man watching something go wrong that he cannot stop. I thought about Charging Dog, who could read weather better than any man I had known, who once turned us back from a pass an hour before a slide came down and buried it, who had a gift for knowing where the season was going before it got there, and who I had relied on for that knowing more times than I had ever told him. I thought about the young men who had ridden under me over the years. Some of them were leading their own groups now. I wondered if they would hear what had happened and what they would make of it. Whether they would think, well, even the best men end up like this, or whether they would think something else. I thought about my son for a while. He was 12 and had his mother's way of holding his chin up when he was uncertain, not defiance, just a kind of composure, like the chin set was a thing the body did to hold the feeling in. I hoped Red Crow would let him be a boy for a few more seasons. The wait always comes soon enough. I had not yet thought about Winona. I was not thinking about Winona the way a man holds a sore tooth with his tongue, aware of it, steering around it, occasionally touching it by accident and feeling the particular specific ache of it and pulling away. Here is the truth about Winona, which I might as well tell cleanly since I am telling this at all. She was the wife of Standing Pine, who had been dead for 2 winters. A fever, winter before last, fast and without much warning. He had been sick 4 days and then he was gone, and she had been left with 2 children, a boy of 13 and a girl of 9, and the practical business of surviving without him. She had come to me the autumn before everything went wrong, when I was still what I was, still someone the council listened to, still the man the camp organized around. in the way camps organize around the person who has been making the decisions long enough that the decisions and the person are no longer separable. She had come to me practically, which was her way. No preamble, no softening. She said her oldest, standing elk, was 13 and ready for training, and did I know a man who would take him? I had found him a place with 2 runs. It was a good fit. 2 runs had the patience for a serious boy, and standing elk was serious in the way boys are when they have watched their father die and understood, viscerally, for the first time, that the world doesn't hold. 2 runs would know how to reach that kind of boy without making a fuss about it. That was all there was between Winona and me in the formal sense. She had come to me with something she needed. I had helped. She had thanked me with the directness she brought to everything, and we had parted. That was the whole of it. Except that I had noticed her, and then kept noticing. She was not young, past 30 winters, 2 children, a face that the seasons had put some years on. The kind of face that is interesting rather than soft, that has been arranged by experience into something with more character than prettiness. But it was not the face that I noticed first. It was the quality she brought to whatever she was doing, a quality of being entirely present inside the task, of moving through work the way a good craftsman moves through work, not hurrying, not wasting, each motion considered before it was made. I had seen it the first time she came to me, and I had seen it in the camp afterward, at the fire or at the horses or talking to her children, and it was the same quality every time. A precision, a reliability. You knew where you stood with her. And sometimes, not often, I had caught her watching me, and looked away, both of us quickly, like we had both touched something hot and pulled back at the same time. I was chief. She was a widow. There was nothing improper in it, a widowed woman, a man without a wife, both of appropriate age, but I had never acted. The position created a kind of distance, and I suppose I told myself there was time, and I was careful, and there was always something more pressing. And then I was exiled, and it didn't matter. Except that out there on the Blackfeet plain with 1 lame horse and no meat left, in the dark under a small cutbank, it turned out it mattered more than I had understood. The gray horse died on the 7th day. Not violently, not with drama. It simply stopped in the middle of a flat open stretch of nothing, not near water, not near grass, just the middle of nothing, and stood there for a moment, and then went down slowly with a kind of resignation, like something deflating. It got to its knees first and then all the way down, and it lay there breathing for a while, and then it stopped breathing. I stood beside it for a long time. I had no particular feeling about the horse. We had not had time to develop a feeling, but I had a feeling about what it represented, which was that I was now on foot and approximately 7 days from any camp, and the temperature was dropping, and I had no food. The horse had stopped representing exile and started representing the actual mechanics of dying. Then I did the practical work. I pulled my blanket and my knife and what small things I had from the saddle. I thought about the horse for another moment, the cloudy eye, the hitching leg, the way it had drunk from that creek hole like it was grateful, and then I left it there for whatever would come to take it and walked north. I am aware of the question, why north? If I was going to die, why keep going north, deeper into Blackfeet country, rather than turning south towards some possibility of survival? I have thought about this. I think it was about not being the thing that turns around, not being the man who is sent away and then sneaks back toward the edge of the people's range hoping something changes. An exiled man who turns back is a man who doesn't believe in his own exile, which means he doesn't believe the council had the right to make it, which means he is, in fact, the defiant man Red Crow called him. I had done one thing Red Crow called defiance, and been wrong about the form of it if not the substance. I was not going to add another. So I walked north, 1 foot in front of the other. The cold was real now, not the sharp bright cold of early autumn but the deep cold, the settling cold, the kind that comes up through the ground through your moccasins and moves into the bone not all at once but over hours, like water rising. I made camps in whatever shelter I could find, small fires, talking myself through the night in the way a person talks to themselves when there is no one else to talk to, not out loud, but inside, a steady internal voice working through what needed doing, what the cold was, what the morning would look like, what the next water source might be. A man alone in bad country keeps himself company with the business of surviving. On the 8th morning, I woke from a shallow sleep and took stock of myself, and noticed that the small toe on my left foot had no feeling in it. I sat with that for a while. I tried to work some circulation back into it with my hands, and it helped a little, but the feeling did not fully return. I knew what that meant. Not immediately catastrophic. A man can lose a small toe and live a full life, but directional. It was telling me where things were headed. I thought, well, this is how it starts. I did not feel sorry for myself, or I tried not to. There were moments. A man alone in the Blackfeet, cold on foot with a numb toe and no food and no horse and nothing in front of him but more cold. There were moments when the full weight of what had happened sat on my chest and it was difficult to breathe under it. 22 winters, and one hand swept flat across a stone, and here I was. Those moments came, and I let them be what they were, and then I picked up the blanket and the knife and walked. Some things you just walk through. I heard the horse before I saw it. I had stopped to rest, mid-morning on the 8th day, in a low spot between two long swells of ground. I was sitting on a flat rock that was cold enough to feel through the blanket I'd folded beneath me, eating a handful of dry lichen I had scraped from a boulder, not food, really, but something to do with my hands and mouth, when I heard it. Hoofbeats. Single horse moving fast, coming from the south. I was on my feet and moving before I had consciously decided to move. I went low, up the side of the nearer swell, keeping my profile off the skyline, and got to the top and went to my belly in the dead grass and looked south. A single rider, a long way off still but coming straight and fast, not wandering, not scouting. Straight, like someone who knew where they were going. I watched and waited. The rider came around the long bend of a dry creek bed, working the horse around the worst of the ice and then back on a direct line. The distance closed, and at some point, when they were still a quarter-mile out, I felt something in the way I was watching change. Something in the shape of the rider, the way the weight sat in the saddle. I did not let myself believe it until they were close enough that there was no other possibility. Then I stood up. Winona pulled her horse up 20 feet away. The horse was a good animal, dark bay, still breathing hard from the run, well made through the chest and hindquarters, not a horse you'd part with lightly. She had a second horse on a lead rope behind her, a young dun with a solid build, and the dun had pack bundles on it, good-sized bundles, a weight that spoke of preparation, planning, someone who had thought through what would be needed. She sat the horse and looked at me, not with relief, particularly, more like the way a person looks at a thing they have ridden a long way to find, checking it against what they expected to find. She was wrapped in a heavy elk-hide robe. Her face was wind-burned and cold, the tip of her nose gone white at the edge from frostbite just starting, and her eyes were the same as they had always been, which is to say clear and direct, and not offering anything they had not decided to offer. I said, "You shouldn't be here." She said, "I know where I am." The Blackfeet. I traveled at night. I know their patterns in this part of the range. I looked at her for a moment. I said, "Who sent you?" "No one." "Winona." I said, "No one." Her voice was flat and final on it, the way the northern plain is flat and final. I packed and I rode. No one sent me. She swung down off the bay in one clean motion. She always moved cleanly, and tied the lead rope to her saddle horn and went to the dun. She began untying one of the bundles, quick and efficient. "I have pemmican. Good pemmican, 3 weeks' worth, not the thin kind. Dried berries mixed into it. There's tallow for your hands and face." She glanced back at me over her shoulder. And a proper robe, that blanket you're wearing, is not enough for up here, not for much longer. She looked at my left foot, at the way I was standing. When did you lose the feeling? Yesterday morning. She nodded like that was the information she needed, and went back to the bundle. I said, you rode 11 days north to bring supplies. 8, I pushed hard. 8 days, I said, alone into Blackfeet country. The Blackfeet are not in this part of their range yet. They move here in the deep winter, another moon at least. She pulled a robe out of the bundle and stood up with it and turned to face me. It was a gray wolf and bison robe, thick and well-made, the kind that takes a family 2 winters to assemble properly, not something you give away carelessly. This is yours. That's your robe. I have another, take it. Winona. Take it, not raised, not hard, just certain, the way she was certain about most things. The tone of a woman who has already done the thinking and has no interest in redoing it out here in the cold. I took the robe. I won't pretend I wasn't grateful. I was very cold. We made camp there in that hollow. She was a fast camp maker, better than most men I had known, which is not a small thing to say, and she had brought enough that the camp was real. Not a survival camp. An actual camp, with a small oil lamp as well as a fire, real food, a second blanket to go under us on the ground so the cold didn't come up from below. She examined my foot without asking, the way a healer examines something, impersonally and with focus, and worked at the small toe with her hands for a long time. The feeling came back, which was painful. The return of blood to a thing that has been denied. It has its own particular quality of pain, sharp and deep at once, and I breathed through my nose and looked at the far wall of the hollow and said nothing. You'll keep it, she said, if we move tomorrow and stay moving. We're not going back yet. She looked up at me. I need a day, I said, to think. She looked at me for a moment, reading something. Then she nodded and went back to the camp. She made a meal, real food, pemmican mixed with the berries, warm from being held against the fire, and she handed me mine without ceremony. We ate on opposite sides of the small fire. The hollow cut the wind and the lamp added its small warmth to the fire's warmth, and for the first time in 8 days I was not cold. After a while she said, the council was wrong. I said, the council decided. Yes, and they were wrong. She said it the way she said most things, not heated, not looking for an argument, just stating what was true in her view and leaving it there to stand or fall on its own. I said, you rode 8 days into Blackfeet country to tell me the council was wrong. I rode 8 days because I am bringing you back. She held my eyes across the fire. The council was wrong is just the truth. I looked at her for a long moment. The fire between us made shadows move across her face. I thought about how she had looked coming around that bend in the dry creek, how I had known before I should have known, and how I had stood up before I had decided to stand up. I said, there is no back for me to go to. I am exiled. From Red Crow's council, not from the people. That's not a distinction that holds. It holds. She was quiet for a moment. There are others who think as I do. 2 runs said so before I left. Charging dog. 11 or 12 families, maybe more by now. People who watched what Red Crow did and made their own judgment. About what? About moving. I sat with that. I understood what she was saying without her having to lay it out. Not confronting Red Crow. Not asking the council to reverse the exile. Just taking the people who disagreed and moving camp east or south, finding new range, becoming their own thing. The way the people have always resolved the unresolvable, not by fighting over it but by separating, by letting the river branch. Water doesn't argue with stone. It goes around it. That splits the band, I said. The band was already split. Red Crow made the split when he swept his hand. We are just acknowledging what already exists. She was right. I knew she was right. I had been walking north for 8 days partly to avoid knowing she was right, and here she was, telling me plainly. I said Charging Dog would come. He has family in Red Crow's camp. He's already packed. He told me to tell you himself, but there wasn't time for him to ride and still get back before winter shut things down. 2 runs. 2 runs is the one who told me which way you'd have gone. He said you'd keep the creek drainage on your left and angle northeast by the 3rd day. He was right. I thought about 2 runs knowing that. Knowing the route I would have taken, not because we discussed it, but because he had ridden with me long enough to know how I read terrain. That kind of knowing takes years to build. You don't abandon it over one council decision. I said, why you? Why did you come, and not 2 runs or Charging Dog or one of the others? The fire moved between us. She looked at it for a moment, then back up at me. Because I wanted to, she said. Plain, complete, no elaboration and no apology. I felt something in my chest that I did not fully have a name for. Not warmth exactly, though warmth was part of it. More like a kind of resettling. The way a structure settles when a load is properly distributed. 8 days of exile and cold, and the gray horse going down and the numb toe and the lichen scraped off a boulder. All of that sitting on one side of a scale, and on the other side, one woman packing 2 horses in the dark and riding 8 days alone into Blackfeet country because she wanted to. Because she had decided I was worth the want. A man who has had a hand swept across a stone to remove him, and then been told, through 8 days of winter riding, that he is worth the cold and the distance and the danger. That man understands, perhaps for the first time with the full force of it, that the opinion of one person who sees clearly is not the same as the opinion of 20 people who see what is convenient. I did not say any of this. I looked at the fire and sat with it. After a while I said, all right. She seemed to understand what the all right meant without me explaining. We slept on opposite sides of the fire, which was right. There was nothing improper between us, not yet. But I woke in the deep of the night, the cold having pressed down hard, and she had pulled her blanket up and shifted in her sleep, and her hand was on the ground near mine, close enough that if either of us had moved a few inches the fingers would have touched. I lay still and looked at the lamp flame, which was very small and steady, and did not move my hand away. In the morning she was up before me. I heard her at the horses before I opened my eyes. By the time I was up she had them fed and watered. She had brought a canvas bag for ice melting, another thing she had thought to bring, and the fire was built up and the food was warm. We should move before full light, she said. I want to clear the upper creek before midday. How many days? 7 if we take it careful. 6 if the weather holds. I stood and stamped my foot against the cold. The toe held, stiff but present. She had done good work on it. I saddled the dun. She had brought a saddle as well, and blankets and a proper bridle. And she mounted the bay, and we rode out of the hollow and south into the gray early light. We did not speak much for the first miles. There was no need to. The decision had been made. All that was left was the riding. But after 3 or 4 miles she pulled up briefly and looked at the sky to the west, reading the clouds. A particular look, brow down slightly, working through something. I had seen Charging Dog with that same look. She said without looking at me, Standing Elk is doing well, with 2 runs. I heard 2 runs told me before. He works hard. He doesn't complain. 2 runs said he reminds him of someone. Did he say who? She glanced at me. He said he didn't want to ruin the boy by saying it out loud. I felt the thing at the corner of my mouth that was not quite a smile, but was in the vicinity of one. She looked back at the sky, and then nudged the bay forward and we rode on. I said, he has your way about him. What way? Like he's already made up his mind about something, and he's waiting to see if the world will catch up. She was quiet for a moment. Then she laughed low and real, not performed, the kind that happens before you can stop it. She looked at me sideways, and for a moment there was something entirely unguarded in her face. Then she turned forward again, and the moment passed, but it didn't go away. It rode with us. On the second day, we crossed Blackfeet sign. I found it in the morning, out from the camp by 100 yards. 3 horses, maybe 4, heading east. A day old, perhaps a day and a half, recent enough to matter. I stood over it and read it for a while, and then went back to camp and broke everything down without explanation, and we were moving in less time than it takes to describe it. She did not ask why. She watched me read the sign, watched my face, and by the time I turned back she was already breaking down the pack bundles. That's a kind of intelligence that doesn't get talked about enough, the intelligence of knowing when to act without being told what the action is for. We kept to low ground all that day. Creek beds, draws, the shallow depressions between swells, moving slow, keeping the horses quiet. I stayed a few 100 yards ahead and read the ground, and she followed without crowding and without falling behind. That night we made a cold camp. No fire. Cold food, cold ground, the stars overhead hard and very bright, the air dry enough that the temperature had dropped faster than usual. She wrapped herself in her robes and slept without complaint. I sat watch for most of the night, not because the sign was that close, but because it was there and I was responsible for her now, and responsibility has its own wakefulness. Sitting there in the dark, I thought about what it meant to be brought back from a place you were sent to die in. People talk about rescue. Rescue is what you do for the helpless, for someone who cannot help themselves. That is not what this was. I was not helpless. I was dying by increments, true, but I was walking, I was making decisions, I was surviving each day. What she had done was something different. What she had done was make a decision about my worth, unilaterally, without consultation, without being asked, and then act on it at considerable cost to herself. She had not rescued me, she had come for me. The distinction matters. A man who has been exiled, who has been told by the vote of his own people that he is expendable, that the community will be fine without him, that his judgment is not worth keeping around. That man has been told something about his worth. And that message is loud, and the cold amplifies it, and the 8 days of walking had given me a great deal of time to hear it. And then she came around that bend in the dry creek. I thought about that for a long time in the dark, about the difference between what Red Crow's hand had said and what her writing said, about how loudly one person who sees you clearly can speak, and how the volume of it doesn't have anything to do with how many people it comes from. On the third day, the weather turned real. A steady driving snow, fine and dry and horizontal, the worst kind because it finds every gap in your clothing and doesn't feel like much, until suddenly you realize you cannot see. We pulled our robes up and bent into it and rode with our eyes on the 5 feet of ground directly in front of us. Around midday, I found a sandstone outcrop with a shallow overhang, barely enough for the horses if we crowded them in, but enough to get out of the direct wind. We got in and tied the horses and ate cold pemmican and waited. She leaned back against the stone and pulled the robe close and looked out at the snow. Her face was dark from the wind. There was a small scar along her jaw that I had noticed before and never asked about. After a while she said, "Do you miss it, the leading?" I thought about it honestly. She was not the kind of person you gave a dishonest answer to. Not because she would call you on it, but because giving her a dishonest answer would have been a waste of something. "I miss knowing what my purpose was," I said. "I was good at it. That's not arrogance, it's just what's true." "It is what's true. But missing it the way you miss a thing that's gone, I don't know. The horse is gone. You find another way to travel." She was quiet for a moment. The snow was not letting up, but it had settled into a steadiness that suggested it would go all afternoon and then stop, rather than building to something worse. She said, "Red Crow was afraid of you." I looked at her. "Not of your body," she said, "of your judgment." He has been chief for 4 winters, and in 4 winters he has made some bad decisions, ones the people have felt. And you were there, 22 winters behind you, people who would follow you, a record of being right. He swept his hand not because what you did was wrong. He swept it because you were right, and being right threatened him. I had known this, or I had known the shape of it, the way you know the shape of a room you have been in many times. But knowing something inside your own head is one kind of knowing, and hearing it said plainly by someone else, without malice, just as a matter of fact, that is a different kind of knowing. The second kind goes deeper. I said, it doesn't change the exile. No, but you should know the true reason. You should not spend the next 10 or 20 years believing you were wrong. I said, you came all the way up here to tell me that. I came up here for several reasons. She paused. That is one of them. The snow outside ran steady past the opening of the overhang. The horses shifted and blew. She did not look away from the snow. I said, tell me the rest. She looked at her hands for a moment, then up at me. When Standing Pine was alive, she said, I did what was needed and I was content enough. Not more than that, but enough. After he was gone, I did what was needed and I was less content. And then one autumn I went to a chief with a practical thing, my boy, and he listened to me like my words had weight, like what I brought to him was real and worth his full attention. And I did not forget it. She said this plain and direct, the way she said everything. No decoration, no invitation to make it into more than it was, just the fact of it offered. A woman remembers, she said, when a man treats what she brings him as real. There are men who listen to a woman's words and hear only the shape of them, the sound. And there are men who actually hear what is said. Those men are not as common as they should be. I said I should have come to you, after Pine died, after a decent time had passed. Maybe, she said, you were chief and careful and I was a widow with 2 children. Those are not small things. I don't fault you the caution. I'm not chief now. No. And I have less caution than I did. A week alone in the Blackfeet cold, with a dead horse takes it out of you. That thing at the corner of her mouth again. Not quite a smile, but close enough that you could see the smile in it. I said, Winona. She waited. I said I should have come. I knew it and I didn't, and that was wrong. She looked at me for a moment, something in her eyes settling. Yes, she said simply. It was, then, but you're here now. I didn't come, you came. That's the same as here. I thought about that. It might have been the truest thing said in that overhang. The snow eased by late afternoon and we rode again. Slower now, the ground uncertain but moving. South, toward 2 runs and Charging Dog and the 11 families who had made their choice, and toward whatever came after. On the 4th day south the land flattened out and the sun came through, low and pale, and we made good time. She talked more that day than she had before. Not constantly, she was not a constant talker, but in the way a person talks when the tension of the country eases and the body remembers that conversation is a thing. She told me about the movement of the families. How it had started with 2 runs saying a quiet word to Charging Dog, and Charging Dog saying a quiet word to his wife's sister's husband, and so on. The way these things move through a camp, the way water finds its way through ground, through the small gaps and the channels that have always been there. She told me that my son had come to her the morning she was packing. He had stood and watched her work and not said anything for a while, and then he had asked her where she was going. She had told him. He had looked at her the way he looked at things, that chin, and then said, "Tell him the bay filly foaled last week. Gray, like the mother. He'll want to know." I thought about that for a while. My 12-year-old sending word to his exiled father about a gray foal, through the woman riding north to bring him back. 12 years old and already understanding that you send what you can, when you can, through whoever is going. His mother's way, he had her way completely. I said, "He knows you went for me." He helped me load the dun. I was quiet. He's a good boy, she said. He is. He'll be a good man, she paused. He needs more to look at than Red Crow. She said it without edge, just as a fact, but the fact had weight. Crossing a frozen creek on the third afternoon, the ice cracked when the bay hit it wrong, and the horse went sideways, and then the dun caught the same edge of ice and went sideways in the other direction. And for a few seconds, it was just horses and noise, and the very specific chaos of animals that are not sure of their footing. She reached across the gap between us without thinking and put her hand on my forearm, gripping hard, and I put mine over hers. And then both horses found their feet and we were across, and she took her hand back. Neither of us said anything about it. But I felt her grip for a long time after, through the wool and the hide, the pressure of it. The way she had reached without thinking, which meant she had stopped thinking about whether it was right to reach. On the fifth day, she asked me about the treaty. Not the exile, the treaty itself, the boundary question, the thing Red Crow had swept his hand across a stone about. She had not asked before. I think she had understood without my saying that I needed to be further from it before I could talk about it without it sounding like argument. I told her. The whole thing, the way it had actually happened, not the version Red Crow had put to the council. The soldiers had come to us with a proposal to shift the winter grazing boundary 14 miles east. 14 miles sounds like nothing if you have never tried to winter a camp on the flats, but 14 miles is a creek, and a creek in winter is the difference between managing and not managing. I had said no. I had said it clearly and with the reasons and without insult, and the soldiers had gone away and come back 3 weeks later with the same proposal and a harder edge to it, and I had said no again. And then Red Crow had taken a private meeting with them, not a council meeting, a private one, and when I heard about it I had gone to him and said, "You cannot make a treaty without the full council, and this particular question I will not agree to regardless." And he had looked at me with the expression of a man who has been building to something and is finally ready to say it out loud, and he had said, "Maybe that's the problem." Winona listened to all of this without interrupting. She had that quality, a real listener, the kind who is not waiting for you to finish so they can say their piece, but is actually taking in what you are saying and turning it over. When I finished, she was quiet for a while. Then she said, "The 14 miles is a creek." "Yes. And without the creek, the winter camp cannot. Not easily, not with the numbers we have now." "Then you were right." I said I was right about the substance. I may have been wrong about the form. A younger man, a man more interested in keeping his position, might have found a softer way to hold the line. Stayed inside Red Crow's hearing instead of going around him, kept him from feeling threatened. "You believe that?" "I've had 8 days to think about it." She looked at me sideways. "You are being fairer to him than he deserves." "Maybe, but I have to live with my own account of it. If I make him the whole villain, I won't see clearly the next time I'm in the same position." She thought about that for a long time, long enough that I thought she had finished with the subject. Then she said, "That is what I mean when I say you are a man worth knowing, that right there." I said nothing. "Most men," she said, "spend their whole lives either thinking they were always right or thinking they were always wrong. What you just did, holding both the truth and the mistake at the same time, that is something. That is not common." The plain stretched out ahead of us, south and south, the sky enormous and pale above it. I thought about what she had said and felt the particular uncomfortable pleasure of being seen accurately, which is not always comfortable even when it is good. On the 6th day, late afternoon, we came down off the high plain into a valley I had known since boyhood. Willows along the creek bottom, yellow now against the brown of everything else. A ridge to the east that I had hunted on my first real hunt, following my father, too young to carry much but old enough to carry something. The smell of the grass here different from the north, not better exactly but recognizable. Known. Home is the smell of the land more than anything else, more than the sight of it. I stopped my horse on the ridge and looked down into it. Winona stopped beside me. After a while she said, "You know this country." "All my life." "It's good country." "Yes." We sat for a moment longer. Below, the willows were gold in the late light. A hawk was working the far ridge, slow, deliberate circles, reading the ground the way a good hunter reads ground, with patience. The wind up here was cold, but it was our wind, the right kind of cold. Winona said, "Standing Elk will want to see you. I have told him some things about you." "What things?" "That you were a man worth knowing, that there are not many of those, that when you find one you should pay attention." I looked at her. She was watching the valley below, her face in profile, the wind moving a strand of her hair across her cheek. I thought about 8 days walking north into nothing, about the gray horse going down, about the lichen scraped from stone, about the numb toe and the small fire, and the silence so complete it felt structural, about sitting in that hollow in the dark and turning the exile over one more time and finding, again, only its shape. And then I thought about hoofbeats from the south. Red Crow had swept his hand across a stone. Winona had saddled 2 horses in the dark and ridden 8 days alone into Blackfeet country. Those were the 2 facts, and they were always going to be the 2 facts for the rest of whatever came. The second one did not erase the first, but it made the first one small, the way fire makes the dark that surrounds it small, not by eliminating it, but by refusing to be defeated by it. We found 2 runs fire an hour before dark. He came out of the tree line when he heard the horses, moving with the deliberate, unhurried pace of a man who has decided not to run any more at his age, and he stopped and looked at me, and we stood 10 feet apart for a moment. Then he came forward and gripped my arm, his hand wrapped hard around the forearm just below the elbow, the way men who have ridden together a long time grip each other when words are not enough and might actually make things worse. "You look like the North tried to keep you," he said. "It gave it a good effort." He let go and looked at Winona. He gave her a nod, a real nod, waited, the kind you give someone who has done something worth acknowledging. She received it without expression, but I saw her chin come up slightly. Standing Elk's way, hers. Charging Dog was at the fire with his wife and their youngest, a girl of about 4 who was asleep against her mother, despite the noise of our arrival. 3 other families were camped within calling distance, fires visible through the trees, the smell of food, the sound of children. 11 families. 2 runs had the count right. They had moved quietly. No announcement, no confrontation. A few families at a time over several days, ordinary movements that would have looked ordinary to anyone watching. Water going around stone. There was food. Real food, roasted meat, proper hot soup, the kind of meal that after 8 days of survival eating had the quality of something almost holy. I sat by the fire and ate and listened to the talk around me and felt the heat work into my hands and face and the deep cold parts of my bones that had been cold for so long I'd stopped noticing. At some point Winona sat down beside me. Not across the fire. Beside me on the same side, her shoulder close to mine, not touching, but close, deliberately close so that the choice of it was clear. 2 runs across the fire caught my eye. I held his gaze without expression. He looked at the fire and found something interesting in it and did not say anything, which was about as much delicacy as 2 runs was capable of. Later, when the families had gone to their robes and the fire had burned low, Winona and I sat alone beside the coals. The stars were out and very bright, the cold dry and clarifying. You could hear the creek somewhere below us, still running under ice. She said, "What will you do with them, the people here?" "What they need," I said. "That's all I've ever done." "Red Crow will hear about this. He'll hear about it within the week. Someone will tell him. He'll call it defiance. He can call it what he likes. 11 families making a new camp is the people doing what the people have always done. It's not defiance. It's just life. He may come after you. I thought about that. The cold, the north, the gray horse, 8 days of walking toward nothing. He sent me to die, I said, and I didn't. A man is harder to frighten after that. She was quiet for a moment. Then she turned and looked at me. Full on, straight, the way she had looked at me since the beginning, directly, without flinching from what was there. She reached up and put her hand against the side of my face. Her palm was warm. In that cold, in that night, her palm was warm, and I had not expected that, and the unexpectedness of it was half of what it meant. Her eyes were steady on mine, not asking, not uncertain, just there with all the weight of 8 days of winter riding behind them. You should have come to me, she said, very quiet, after Pine. I know. Don't make me wait again. I put my hand over hers. Her fingers were rough from work and cold, the way the hands of a woman who has done real work her whole life are rough, and I held her hand against my face and looked at her and said, I won't. We stayed like that for a while. The coals shifted once, settling. The creek ran somewhere below us in its ice. The stars moved slowly, the way they always do when you have enough stillness to notice. There was nothing soft about it. No great declaration, no performed tenderness. Just two people who had found their way to the same fire after a long cold, and the solid fact of what she had done between us, her choosing, and his receiving that choice with everything he had left. After a while she took her hand back and looked at the coals, the way a person looks at something they are comfortable sitting beside. She said, I was not sure what I would find up there. What did you think you might find? A man who had decided to stay, who had given up on the South. She was quiet for a moment. I was afraid of that, more afraid of that than the Blackfeet. I thought about it honestly. There had been moments. Not the whole 8 days, but moments where the idea of turning further into the north and just becoming something else, not dying exactly, but disappearing, dissolving into that flat, empty country where no one expected anything of you, had a quality of rest to it that I don't like to admit to. When you have been responsible for others for 22 winters, the idea of being responsible for no one has a taste to it, even when the taste is mostly cold and mostly death. There were moments, I said. She looked at me. Not by the end, I said. By the end I was just walking, but earlier, there were moments. She held that without judging it, sat with it the way she sat with most things, not rushing to reassure, not troubled by the truth of it. That is why I rode fast, she said. I was afraid of those moments. I looked at her. The firelight was very low now, just coals, but enough to see by. You couldn't have known that, I said. You couldn't have known how I was. I know how a man looks, she said, when what he has been doing his whole life has been taken from him. I watched my father after the first treaty. He didn't die in the cold, but he went away anyway. She looked back at the coals. I was not going to let that happen again to someone she stopped. I waited. To someone I had decided to ride for, she said. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was the kind of thing a man carries for the rest of his life. In the morning I was up before light. Old habit, older than the exile, older than almost everything. I walked the perimeter of the camp in the dark and checked the horses and read the ground and looked at the sky. The work of a man responsible for others. I had not been that for 10 days, and the returning of it felt like putting on a coat that still fit. 2 runs found me at the northeast edge of the camp, as the sky began to change. We stood together and looked at the valley below, the willows going from black to gray to the beginning of yellow, the creek ice catching the first flat light. He said, the boy standing elk. I know. Good kid. I know. He's going to need someone to show him what a man is. He paused. Someone beyond me. I'm a good second man. I always have been. But boys need to see the first man too. I said nothing. He looked at the valley. "You're going to have to lead this group," he said. "It won't look like before. We're not the full band, but we are enough to need leading, and leading is what you know." "I know. Red Crow is going to sit on it for a while before he moves. He'll want to see what we do first." "That's right. He swept me out to remove a problem. If he comes after me now, he recreates the problem. He'll wait and see if we become something he needs to deal with directly. Which gives us time, enough time to be something worth dealing with." Two Runs turned and looked at me for a moment with the expression he had on his face when he'd seen the exile handed down, not grief, not quite, but something that was trying not to be grief. Except it was different now. He said, "She rode 8 days into Blackfeet country alone." "I know. I've ridden with a lot of men over the years, brave men, men who didn't flinch." He paused. "I can count on one hand the ones who would do what she did." I looked at him and said, "Don't make a speech about it." He laughed, low and real, the way Two Runs laughed, like it surprised him. "No," he said, "no speech." Below us the camp was waking. Small fires. The smoke going straight up in the still cold air, which was its own kind of weather reading. No wind this morning, cold and clear. The horses moving at the edge of the willows. A child's voice somewhere, the specific pitch of a young child waking up and not being happy about it, which is a sound that belongs to every camp everywhere and says, "We are alive, we are here, there are young ones." Winona came out of the tree line below, heading toward the horses. She did not know I was watching. She moved the way she always moved, purposeful, unhurried, entirely inside whatever she was doing. She stopped at the dun and ran her hand along its shoulder, checking the muscles from the long ride, the way you check a horse you care about. The dun turned its head toward her, leaned in slightly. I watched her for a long time. I thought about what she had said by the fire. "I rode here for several reasons." I thought about the way she had put her hand against my face in the cold and said, "Don't make me wait again," and the way I had held it there. I thought about what it meant to be worth that, worth 8 days in the cold, worth the Blackfeet country and the night riding and the risk and the distance, worth all of it, not because she was told to think so, not because anyone argued her into it, not because it was easy or obvious or without cost, but because she had looked at me clearly for a long time and made her own judgment. That judgment is what I carried out of the North, not the exile, that too, sure, but the exile is just a scar. This other thing is different from a scar. She looked up from the dun and found me on the ridge. Held it for a moment, that direct look, clear and unhurried. Then she turned back toward the fire. I stood on the ridge with Two Runs beside me and the valley below me and the cold at my back. 11 families, people who had decided what they thought. A valley I had known since I was a boy. The work ahead, which was real work, the kind worth doing. And down there at the fire, the woman who had ridden north to find me. I stood in the early light, and I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That was all, that was enough.